Rewind back to 2018 and it was time for Pokemon to launch their first traditional style Pokemon game, which would be coming on the Nintendo Switch. This would be Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. And as soon as these were revealed, suddenly Pokemon fans immediately dismissed the direction. Fans were going, wait, there's no wild battles. Wait, we're using Go style catching mechanics. Oh, wait, you can only play with one Joy-Con on a TV. There's no Pro Controller support. Fans didn't even let the games release before casting immediate judgment. However, now that the OG Switch's era is slowly closing as we make room for the Switch 2, something strange has happened. People have really changed their minds about these heavily criticized gems. Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee weren't just misunderstood, they were secretly brilliant, and almost no one realized it during the time. And to me, it's always funny how much sentiment can change, right? Because initially, the complaints rolled in about this game. I mean, this was before the game even released. Just on the reveals, people already had their thoughts. A lot of players felt that it was just way too casual and they really oversimplified the game. And it also kind of felt like Game Freak was just playing it really safe with this as well, because it was yet another Gen 1 remake. And on top of that, they were also removing Pokemon's items, Pokemon's abilities, and wild encounters, which was a massive turnoff for a lot of players. I mean, check out some of the initial reactions online before the game even released. So I've actually found some threads when the reveal trailer dropped, and I'm just reading through them. It's kind of wild to look at it because you can see the emotions before the game came out and kind of what people expected the Pokemon Sword and Shield game would be and how they compared it to the Let's Go games. But here on the reveal trailer, you can see someone says, "Ugh, skip, I want nothing to do with Go," which is very much the kind of reaction it had. The fact that the Let's Go games were very much tied with Pokemon Go, people didn't want a bar of it. And I mean that, man. People were so disappointed at that. But I kind of feel Go's mechanics did work quite well with the series now in retrospect. Another person says the graphics look very kiddie, especially on the character model. And it's funny that they say that because they didn't know what was gonna come. They didn't know the poor performance that was awaiting them, right? So I do think the graphics actually did complement the style a fair bit, but it's funny to see the reaction. And here was on the mega thread when the trailer kind of got revealed as well. Overall, looks like an interesting take on the series, but definitely glad that these aren't being considered as core series games. Hoping they experiment with some systems and use them to make the next generation all better. Well, in some ways they did, in some ways they didn't. I suppose the mountable and the rideable Pokemon didn't really get brought back to the level that they were in Let's Go, which I will talk about more later on in this video. But you can see fans kind of expected, hey, this is kind of a trial ground and then you're gonna level up after this. And in a lot of ways they did level up, but in a lot of ways they probably could have done a lot more better. And you can see here saying, I feel like Pokemon Let's Go is basically a test run, getting used to the Switch hardware and doing it all in HD. As a result, the real core game in 2019, which would be Pokemon Sword and Shield, which no one knew at the time, will incorporate some of the lessons learned in making these PLG games, which is kind of interesting. And I think that take was kind of, it made sense and it was like a logical take at the time, but I actually don't feel that Pokemon Sword really drawed that much from Let's Go in any way, shape or form. In saying that, I actually feel like there were two different kind of pathways. And I feel like now when you look in retrospect, you can actually clearly see Let's Go was doing its own thing and Pokemon Sword and Shield were doing its complete own thing as well. And you can see here, mostly interested in the main series title coming out in 2019. Hopefully we get more information about that game soon. And it's so funny because back then, most people cared about the mainline titles, which is still kind of the case today. Because now it's kind of weird to think because I think a lot of the gamers right now are actually more excited for the spin-off games rather than the core series. Like the Legends EA, I think people are more excited for that than what they're expecting for Generation 10 at the moment because, you know, Mega Evolutions are coming back and you can see that there's this huge demand for what the spin-off games can do because the spin-off games allow the games to break free from the status quo and experiment. And if they like something that they experimented with, they can bring it into a core series game. So I do feel like it's actually shifted a lot. And me, who's played the Pokemon game since 1999, I actually am much more excited for the spin-off games because like I said, they're able to experiment, bring new things in, and if they like it, they'll test it more. If they don't like it, who cares? But it does allow them to get more experimental. And here you can see the co-op did it for me. I don't care if these games are straight up garbage. I get to play with my significant other. But the co-op's purpose, which I will speak about more in a second, it felt like the co-op's purpose was experienced player is able to bring a younger generation into the games. That's kind of what it felt like. And I think the co-op experience experience now in retrospect wasn't the most fleshed out wild co-op experience, but it did do a good job if you had like a pilot teaching a complete newcomer, and that's what it felt like. Now also, if you have gotten to this point in the video and you've been enjoying it, I'd just like to say thank you, and also feel free to subscribe to the channel. When you do engage with the content, it really does help promote it to a wider audience, and it's really appreciated. Anyway, let's get back to Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Now here's the thing, right? Even with all these complaints, one thing people didn't realize was that Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee were brilliant because of the simplicity. It's funny, right? Because even though this was the first traditional game for Pokemon on the Switch, I'd argue that the graphics have never been topped, which is kind of wild to think about, right? In fact, I think the Let's Go games have the best visuals out of any of the Switch games, and that's partly because I feel the Let's Go art style matches Pokemon's aesthetic perfectly. I think one area that people forgot was that the Let's Go games were designed for newcomers and to welcome kids to the franchise. Literally, the whole purpose of these games was to be an entry point and strip down the complexity that's happened with Pokemon over the years. Like, one thing Pokemon does really right with the Let's Go games was just how accessible they made it for someone who never played a Pokemon game. They removed HM moves. They took away Pokemon's items. They removed their abilities. Now you may be wondering, wait, how does that make it good? Well, there's actually a key realization I had when playing the Pokemon Let's Go games. With Pokemon games, right, we think it's the battles. We think it's the cool items or the unique abilities. But Pokemon Let's Go actually showed us something very different. When you remove all the extras, right, you don't have any of the held items. You've got no abilities. You've got no wild battles. Do you know what's left? Surprisingly, it's the heart of Pokemon. And that's why the Let's Go games actually make an impact that was never recreated on the Nintendo Switch. Because the Let's Go games truly feel like an adventure that lets the player focus on the experience of Pokemon rather than the new flashy gimmick or another new trend. And it introduced some amazing updates which are very unique to the Let's Go games. One of the key areas of improvement was with shiny Pokemon. And I want to actually talk about that because that's what made this game so awesome, right? Because shiny hunting went from an impossible task to a realistic challenge with these games. So if you've ever tried to get shiny Pokemon, you'll probably know they are really challenging to find. Now, Pokemon games do allow you to manipulate the odds of catching a shiny Pokemon, though in Let's Go, these really improved. So the base odds to find a random shiny Pokemon is 1 in 4,096. However, if you get a decent catch combo, your odds of finding a shiny would improve. So a catch combo works by catching a specific Pokemon without catching anything else or letting one run away. Now, if you do manage to get a catch combo of 31 or higher, your shiny odds improve dramatically. And because the shiny Pokemon actually can be seen in the wild, this actually makes finding them far easier. And I think no one actually realized that having the overworld shinies makes it just that much easier to find the shinies. So I mean, I've played Pokemon games my whole life, and I can actually remember how many shinies I've ever encountered in real legitimate games, right? I once encountered a Drowsy in Generation 2, and I thought my game was glitched. So when I saw it was like a purple Drowsy, I was a kid at the time, I actually turned off my Game Boy Color. Literally, dude, don't remind me about that because it still just annoys me when I think about it today, right? But I also found a shiny Dratini as well in my playthroughs. But that's really it for me. Like when I talk to other players, they always say, oh, nearly every playthrough I found a shiny. That's never been the case for me. It's like, I've played so many playthroughs of games and never found any shinies. However, with Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, I was finding shinies heaps, man, because like I said, the overworld encounters makes it super easy to actually bump into one. Because you got to remember, when you're in the wild grass looking for a Pokemon, you only get one shot. But when you have the whole overworld and you can see every Pokemon, shinies are really easy and you can actually see them because they have like the stars around them and all that. From having one Pokemon I caught in a legitimate playthrough before this, in Let's Go games, I caught over 5 shinies in the one playthrough. And that's a big difference. And I feel like it made it a little bit more enjoyable because shiny Pokemon are crazy hard. And you got so many people in forums and groups and Discord groups, they all chase these shiny Pokemon like wild, man. Like, and I get it, it's a crazy challenge, especially for like Gen 4 and before that, those shinies are super hard, right? But that's what I mean, man. It went from this impossible task of getting a shiny to the Let's Go games, you're like, hey, wait, this is actually kind of possible. And I think that made a real difference to people who like catching shinies or people who really want to hunt a shiny that they desire. It actually became far easier. And that was a really good implementation notification. I mean, overworld shinies just make a huge difference, and it's a great feature that added. Now, moving on to another cool aspect around the games was that it's the only traditional style Pokemon game with couch co-op. So if a 2-player shakes the controller, you can actually play co-op in these games. Now, I know other Pokemon games have had some form of like a co-op adventure, you know, with different kind of video games, right? But the thing is, this was the first traditional style game that actually allowed co-op, and this was the first time that my daughter and I were able to play. Now, I'm not going to be saying, hey, the co-op experience is something wild and you're going to have the best time playing it, and it's like something like, you know, like when you play Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze and the co-op's incredible, or Super Mario 3D World and you almost can't believe how good the co-op is. It's not to that level, all right? But at least you can introduce someone to the franchise, especially kids. Like for me, I played Pokemon games growing up. Now, obviously for me, like when I play Pokemon, it's just like a thing that's kind of like established in my brain. I start playing the games, it's super easy for me, right? But the fact that I was able to bring my daughter in when she was 4 years old and she was able to try catch Pokemon and the mechanics all made it fun for her, that was a real game changer, right? And I feel like the whole brand of the Let's Go games and the whole purpose of them was exactly for that reason. It wasn't meant for an established player. It wasn't meant for a real long fan of the franchise. They were literally built to say, hey, we're going to introduce you to the Pokemon games. And they did it really well with the co-op. Because if an experienced player came in, they were able to bring, you know, a newcomer in and they could really enjoy the games. And I think that made a massive difference. Couch co-ops never really returned in a Pokemon game since then. They were kind of reserved for the Let's Go games. So, you know, for me, I'm actually a fan of the couch co-op, and even though they probably have to map out a few of the issues, I think it does make a big difference for the games. Now, moving on to the third point, it actually still visually holds up and the performance is unreal for such an early Switch title. And this is what I find so funny about this, because when the games were revealed and introduced, everyone was like, oh, come on, we don't want this. This is going to be the first Switch title. You're giving us a watered down version, which to be honest, I was kind of like half on it. I was like, all right, it's interesting, but at the same time, I was actually kind of excited for a Gen 1 remake because like the last one was like Fire Red and Leaf Green. So for me, it was like, oh, well, whatever. I'm older now. I'm actually excited to play through it again. But I know a lot of the community didn't like it, right? But what's really funny is when you look back now, especially for the Nintendo Switch, which kind of the era has closed now, right? Because we're onto the Switch too. The Let's Go games actually perform way better. And that's wild to think about, right? But the reason why it works so well is because I think Pokemon is kind of in a difficult position, right? Because a lot of the fans, it's like they want more things happening. They want more visual performance. They're asking for so much more, myself included, right? But at the same time, I kind of feel like Pokemon, the simplicity and the whole Pokemon experience of just catching Pokemon, training your Pokemon up and like building a team, I think that's the heart of Pokemon. And I think Let's Go games actually made you strip away from all that noise and you actually realize, wow, this is an incredible game and super fun. So that's why I think sometimes Pokemon, maybe they don't even know which direction they want to take the franchise, but you know what? I actually think some of the simplest kind of things about this game made it the best as well. And I hope that Pokemon can kind of learn from Let's Go in their own way and actually apply it to future entries. Because I think if you ask a lot of fans of what they liked about kind of the Switch games for Pokemon, I think a lot of people would enjoy the Let's Go games. Now, moving on to the next point, it was the easiest Pokemon game to welcome to newcomers. Now, I spoke about this before, but that's kind of the heart of what Pokemon Let's Go was made to do, right? It was actually made as an entry point for newcomers because the Nintendo Switch had a lot of kids coming in. There was going to be a lot of a younger generation coming on, and it's almost like an onboarding process to Pokemon. That's what the Let's Go games felt like. And that's why the co-op actually worked really well, which I spoke about. But I also noticed that when I was trying to introduce Pokemon Scarlet and Violet to my daughter, she was 4 years old at the time, she was kind of like, wow, there's a little bit more complexity. Not much, but definitely it wasn't as easy to just pick up. But with the Let's Go games, all the things that people complained about, which were the motion controls, how you had to use the Joy-Con to throw it at the screen, that's all the things she loved so much. So me, when I was looking at her playing, I could see, wow, she's actually really enjoying this video game. It's actually way more enjoyable for her because it actually brought a lot of factors. I mean, the motion controls for the game actually worked for this entry. And I know that's crazy to say because I'm not the biggest fan of motion controls, but when you really look at the vision of the game, it actually really did work well for newcomers, and I think they did a really good job at this. Finally, one of the best aspects of the Pokemon Let's Go games was the rideable and follow behind Pokemon, which created the best immersion in a Pokemon game to date. I mean, ever since Pokemon Yellow, when you had Pikachu follow you, companion Pokemon have always been one of the most loved parts of the series, and it's a big reason why why Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver have such a positive reception with fans. Now, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee did partner Pokemon really well, and they actually had more utility than ever before. For example, instead of using your bicycle, you could actually ride Arcanine to traverse the map, which is something that's never been recreated since then. Or if you're in the water, you could be surfing with Gyarados, or you could be flying on Charizard across the city. This has never been seen in a Pokemon game before, and still it's never been recreated. And to me, it's so wild to think that one of the best features has never been able to be brought back in as well as the Let's Go games. I mean, yes, with the DLCs for Sword and Shield, you did get some kind of following Pokemon, and you know, they would sometimes fly behind you and they would traverse behind you, right? But when you kind of compare it to the Let's Go games, it was nothing like that because the Let's Go games actually brought in the utility. Being able to mount Arcanine rather than ride a bicycle was a crazy cool decision. And I actually really feel that the Let's Go games started a unique point for the franchise, but then again, they weren't able to kind of hold on to that as well. Because even though I did enjoy Pokemon Sword and Shield, I kind of feel that Let's Go actually did a few things better. And especially when you compare Let's Go to Scarlet and Violet, it's kind of wild to see a Pokemon game that came out 4 years before has a lot more positives in a lot of ways than the latest entry. So hopefully Pokemon can actually bring this back in a lot of new and creative ways because I think it's a real fan favorite. Now, the Pokemon Let's Go games were fantastic and they actually have held up quite well, and even though they watered down the game a lot, it did make for an interesting concept which never received a sequel. However, it does make you wonder why modern Pokemon games have declined so much in quality and what actually went wrong. Like, was there a specific moment when it all started going downhill? Well, I actually do reveal the answer to that in this detailed video right here. Within this video on screen, I actually go over that in great detail and cover what actually happened with modern Pokemon's downfall. If you enjoyed this video, then click that video that's appearing on screen and I'll see you on the next video. Don't forget to subscribe and have a great day.